Unit 3.1, Video 2. EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, has published a series of suggestions and indications to follow a healthy diet. Here we can see some of them. For example, the first one refers to total carbohydrate intake. So they suggest that the intake of carbohydrates, including carbohydrates from starchy foods such as potato, pasta, and from simple carbohydrates such as sugar, should range between 45 and 60% of the total energy intake for both adults and children. This sentence is frequently discussed by the national food-based dietary guidelines among most countries, suggesting that carbohydrates, so starchy foods, should represent main source of energy in our diet. Another very important sentence is the number 3, which describes the intake of dietary fiber. And a daily intake of 25 grams of dietary fiber is considered adequate for normal bowel function in adults. And in addition, there are evidence that shows that there are health benefits associated with higher intake of dietary fiber. For example, a reduced risk for heart disease and type 2 diabetes. And a third important element of these references is related to intake of fat. It should range between 20 and 35% of the total energy intake. There is good evidence that higher intakes of saturated fats and trans fat lead to increased blood cholesterol, which may contribute to the development of heart disease. So these are some examples of very detailed dietary reference that have been published by the European Food Safety Authority. Also, the WHO has described the key aspect that any guidelines should address. They include a varied diet consisting mainly of plant-based food, daily intake of bread, grains, rice, and potatoes, or even pasta, a daily intake of fresh and local vegetables and fruits, maintaining a healthy body mass index, and performing some physical activity, low intake of fat, the intake of lean meat, poultry, fish, and legumes, so products providing proteins, low sugar intake, low salt intake, limited alcohol consumption, and also the hygienic preparation of food, as well as the exclusive breastfeeding. So the main aspect, the first aspect any guideline should address is related to food variety, because varying the food we eat allow us to include in the diet different substances, different molecules, not only different nutrients, which are almost present in every diet, but also all those substances present in foods that are non-nutrients, but they are able to allow the body and our tissues to cope with different stresses. And also, of course, varying the food we eat is allow also to stimulate the taste and not to bore our taste. Suggestion to refer to the intake of mainly cereals like baked products like bread, but also grains, rice, potatoes, and or pasta, is a suggestion, a guideline related to the aspect of the amount of sugar we introduce. Focusing the diet on complex carbohydrates like those present in whole grains, but also rice or pasta, it allows to better control the glycemia, especially if the diet include a low sugar intake. These kind of foods, they often also provide dietary fiber. Dietary fiber are extremely important in reducing the risk of diseases like colon cancer disease. They allow to control hunger, but as we say before, they are also related to a reduction of cardiovascular diseases and diabetes. So anytime we introduce food containing carbohydrates, we should prefer some whole grain product. Another aspect any guideline should address is related to the maintenance of a healthy body mass index. So being physically active helps really to first to keep the body mass index in the range of normality, but it also reduces the risk of developing overweight and obese, reduce the risk of developing some non-communicable diseases. So physical activity is inversely related to cardiovascular disease, for example. It allows maintain a high mobility, and it maintains the lean mass, stimulating the muscle mass. We are able to maintain our lean mass also during aging, so in elderly people, and it allows counteracting sarcopenia, which is a very frequent and common condition both in elderly people and also in people suffering acquired disability. Another aspect any guideline should address is the low fat intake, total and saturated. As said by the European Food Safety Authority, fat intake should not exceed the 35% of the entire amount of energy we introduce in our diet. So we should focus on quality and reduce the total quantity of fat. Focusing on quality means choosing foods containing mainly unsaturated fats, such as extra virgin olive oil, plant-based oils, but also foods like fish or seafoods. And again, as suggested by the European Food Safety Authority, we should reduce as much as possible those foods containing trans fatty acids that have been related to an increase of bad cholesterol in the blood. So this means minimize the consumption of processed foods. Talking about protein sources like meat, poultry, fish, and legumes, we should focus on high-quality protein. High-quality protein comes from animal and fish foods. So those foods that are often, especially if we are talking about animal foods, those foods that are related to the presence of saturated fats, so those we should limit. So this is a very tricky point. On one side, we should focus on high quality proteins from animal foods. At the same time, we should reduce the amount of animal food since they contain saturated fat. In this case, the ability in varying the food we eat is really helpful and extremely important. It means we should eat few times a week red meat, for example, few times a week white meat, some fish, and we should also remember that also plant-based food, they contain some protein. So we can combine and mix together cereals with legumes, for example, obtaining a perfect mixture of amino acids. And in such a way, we can reduce the amount of animal foods and proteins. A very important aspect is the suggestion and the guidelines related to the alcohol consumption. Alcohol is extremely dangerous in our society. It is responsible for development of many diseases, and also is responsible for a huge number of deaths around the world. Something has to be said is very moderate alcohol consumption is still tolerated, especially if this moderate consumption comes from red wine or beer. And this is due to the fact that this kind of beverages contains some molecules. They contain some polyphenols that belong to the class of nutraceutical compounds, so they can allow to cope against some stresses. And a final aspect related to dietary guidelines is the one concerning the hygienic preparation of food. This is extremely important, especially if we manipulate the food we eat. So hygienic preparation of food means avoid the spread of bacteria when cooking and preparing or even storing food. So from the National Health System of the UK, I took these 4 aspects of hygienic preparation. They call it the 4 C's. So cleaning, cooking, chilling, and cross-contamination. So we have to be sure the way we clean the food, the fact that we cook it at the proper temperature, so that to eliminate all bacteria. We have to take into account the way we chill, so we froze or we refrigerate the food we eat and the time of storing. And we have to try to avoid cross-contamination between different foods. If these are some examples of official guidelines for people, for the general public and population, we don't have any specific guidelines for people with disability. However, the general guidelines, they apply to everyone, of course with some shrewdness. Again, from the publication entitled The Art of Healthy Living with Physical Impairment, I took this list of special tips for special people. So we can see that most of them are exactly those we discussed for the general population, like reducing the amount of saturated fat, increasing the amount of polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fats, reducing the amount of sugars in the diet. And all these suggestions are even more important for those suffering acquired disability, because, for example, the amount of fruit and vegetables they eat, it can really allow a better transit in the digestive tract and in the intestine. Also, the reduction of sweet and sugary drinks is really important, since these are beverages rich in calories, but they do not reduce the hunger, or they do not provide any nutrient of high quality. Thank you for your attention, and of course more details are available in the materials provided together with the unit.